Hey everyone, it's Shaf, aka That Mill Guy, coming at you with another Modern Mill sideboard guide. Today we're going to be taking a look at Modern Jund, alright, the marquee mid-range strategy, and seeing how we can enact our plan and take a look at some pieces that we can use to beat that deck. From the top, we're going to be looking at strength and weaknesses of the deck, as well as some key 2 to 3 cards that we might need to be aware of, and then finally, of course, cards that we should take out, cards that we should bring in. Before we get into that, I want to give a quick shout out to all of my Patreon subscribers, the individuals that help keep the quality high and the lights on, and as well the individuals that help influence my content. So if you wanted to vote on the next couple of videos that I do, whatever it is, you're going to find that right on my Patreon. So subscribe at any tier and you get access to all of that, link down below. Now, let's get right into it. Let's look at the strengths of Modern Jund. Well, what does Jund want to do? Jund wants to enact, give or take, the same plan every single game. It wants to start off with some early game disruption in either hand disruption in Thoughtseize or permanent base disruption in Assassin's Trophy. Okay, then after that, with some information, it wants to then enact and play a threat. Okay, something like a Tarmogoyf or a Bloodbraid Elf. All right, something to take your life total from 20 to 0. But if that's not working out, well, it wants to, what I like to call, cast a sustain piece, something that's going to keep the tempo on board ahead for them and keep your disadvantage at an all-time high. Something like Liliana the Veil, or of course the new Wrenn and Six. Okay, so mostly it's planeswalkers, and that's what it excels at, enabling that 1, 2, 3 step plan and then keeping your hand low and you top decking, as essentially the deck wants to be top decking better than you. All right, and be ahead on board. Now, what is the deck bad at? Well, the deck is going to be generally bad at stopping decks that try and stop this plan. If you're able to disrupt at least 2, if not all 3 parts of this plan, especially as a mill player, you're going to be far, far ahead, okay? Disrupting their creatures, maybe their interaction, and especially if you're able to deal with those sustain pieces, you're definitely 110% going to be top decking better than them, and you're going to put yourself ahead. Maybe not on board, right? But in terms of, beating their deck, milling them to 0. So with that in mind, let's talk about a quick philosophy. Before we get into some key cards, I'm going to talk about a quick philosophy that this deck is really going to challenge for us modern mill players, and it's going to be threat evaluation. Okay, so because this deck has so many different angles, we have to remind ourselves, okay, what are we most afraid of when we're playing against this deck? Because there's so many different moving pieces, and that's something for you to evaluate as a mill player. That's not something that I can teach you, and it's going to come with experience. So you have to look at a specific game state, and let's say you have an Echoing Truth, and you look at the game state and you say, okay, this Tarmogoyf is going to swing at me. Am I going to lose the game this time when it swings into me? Am I going to lose the game next turn if that swings into me? If not, well, then maybe it's not worth using that Echoing Truth, but instead sandbagging it for one more turn for that Liliana the Veil activation, where they top deck it, they play it, they activate it, and you can Echoing Truth the Liliana the Veil in response to its discard activation, ultimately getting rid of it. You need to evaluate how can you leverage yourself into a position where you're going to be able to win based off top decking almost anything or some key specific cards, okay? And this is going to be a deck to test it for you. So we're going to look at some key cards. What are some things that we have to worry about? Well, first and foremost, we have to worry about Thoughtseize. Okay, Thoughtseize is going to be, especially in the game 2 to 3 scenario, we have to realize that our opponent is going to be prioritizing hands that can create an unfetched, untapped black source on turn 1. And I say unfetched because one of the key pieces that we have against Jund is going to be Archive Trap. Okay, so if they're able to get that out of our hand, they're going to be miles ahead. Archive Trap can eventually lead to a Visions of Beyond, and Visions of Beyond is, of course, I'm going to get into one of another key pieces that we need to beat this deck, but 1 second. So Thoughtseize, okay, so stopping that is going to be a real way that we stay ahead. Okay, even if it gets Assassin's Trophy later, we are able to, I'm talking about Leyline of Sanctity. Even if some of our disruption gets Assassin's Trophy later, we're fine. We've stopped that turn 1 to 2 tempo. Now, what's another card that we have to look at? Well, it's going to be Tarmogoyf, as I've mentioned. Tarmogoyf is notably a card that gets very easily Fatal Pushed, right? And Fatal Push is, of course, as they're recording this video, the Rise of Humans, Fatal Push should be more of in your 75. So So something to look out for. It's going to be a card that we have to be careful of because it may seem innocuous and very quiet just because it can be fatal pushed. But of course, one glimpse of the unthinkable can turn that thing from a 2-3 all the way up to a 5-6, and now you have a kind of 2 to 3 turn clock on your opponent's side. All right, now the last card I want to look at is, of course, Liliana the Veil. We don't need to necessarily worry about Wrenn and Six, as most of the time that thing's just getting back a land or so, so let's not worry about that. We're talking about Liliana the Veil. How do we beat this card? Well, Visions of Beyond. And of course, as you saw, this is going to be ultimately stopping our opponent from the very get-go. If we're able to create a Leyline of Sanctity scenario, stopping our opponent's Thoughtseize, we're going to eventually be able to get off our mill spells, fire up a Visions of Beyond, and evidently win the kind of long-term advantage game that our opponent's trying to stop us from doing, refueling our hand with 3 to 4 cards, whatever it may be, with the Visions of Beyond, and stopping that Liliana discard. Our opponent will have 1 card, we'll have, again, 3 to 4 cards thanks to the fueled Visions. Now, using all of that, threat evaluation, and some key concepts that we want to move into, let's talk about cards that we want to board out generally in this matchup. So, first and foremost, we want to board out some of our permanents. Okay, we want to make sure those assassin trophies are as dead as possible. So in Snaring Bridge, it may be a little counterintuitive, but is not a great card. They have so many ways to deal with it. They're going to have Assassin's Trophy, they're going to have their Kolaghan's Command, they're going to have the Liliana Ultimate, so it's not worth it. It's not going to stick on the board for so long. Next, we want to be boarding out, of course, some amount of Miss Mirror Corps. Again, we don't want to flood out on them. It's going to be one of our ways that we win through a resolved Liliana, but of course, they have so many ways to deal with it. It's going to be very difficult to stick multiple ones of them, and we'd rather just draw interaction. Finally, the last card that I want to look at taking out is, of course, Scheming Symmetry. Scheming Symmetry is going to be an inherent card disadvantage engine because, of course, it doesn't replace itself. It puts a card on top of your library. Although it fuels Archive Trap, well, what if they, Inquisition or, Thoughtseize your hand and they take away the Archive Trap in there? Scheming Symmetry becomes one of the most useless cards in your deck. Okay, so inherent card disadvantage, and by casting it, you are literally helping your Jund player. Do not play Scheming Symmetry as a mill archetype or as a card if Jund is heavy in your meta. Now, I know I said the last card was final, but I want to sneak this one in. Surgical Extraction. Surgical Extraction should be shaved. I don't think it should be taken out fully, although I will take out 4 of them, in cases here and there. But you want to shave them just because Jund is a critical mass deck. There are some key cards that we want to get rid of, such as Kolaghan's Command, Bloodbraid Elf, Liliana the Veil, whatever it may be. But because you're able to, well, what if you surgical out Liliana the Veil? Well, now you've lost 2 life a lot of the time, and you've helped their kind of creature plan. But what if you surgical out, well, one of their creatures? Let's say you surgical out the Tarmogoyf. Well, you're also down a card. You've taken out that, but now they're going to be able to win through something like maybe a creature land, but with a resolved Liliana, discarding your hand and winning through the onboard presence, okay? So you would rather have a kill spell or an interactive spell than surgicaling out a preemptive threat, as they will top deck many more ways to take you out. Okay, so it's not a key card against this. They are not a fragile combo deck. Shave some Surgical Extractions. Finally, in this last section, let's talk about cards that we want to bring in to beat this matchup. So let's look at the 3 tiers of things that I've talked about. So that early game disruption, that mid-game creature, and finally that sustain piece in the Planeswalkers. So how do we beat that disruption? I've said it before, Leyline of Sanctity. You want to be playing a full 4. Do not play 3 Leyline of Sanctities, okay? In my opinion, I think it's very poor deck construction to be playing 3 Leyline of Sanctities. Why play it in the first place? It's an effect that you really need hands down, okay? You need it in your opening hand against certain decks such as Burn, and especially against Thoughtseize decks, so you need to increase your odds of doing it, okay? Now in terms of the next piece, stopping the creatures, well, nice and simple, you actually just want to be playing more Fatal Pushes, okay? It's just going to be great, especially in Modern's current meta, against humans, Death Shadow, whatever it is, to have more Fatal Pushes available to you, especially removal spells that are instant speed. You might also consider something like Noxious Grasp, but again, not so great against Jund. It does kill, of course, Tarmogoyf and Wrenn and Six, but it doesn't kill Liliana the Veil, which is the key piece here. Okay, so fatal pushes are going to help you against these creature decks. So hold up your fetches. You do not need to fetch aggressively against this deck. Hold them up for the Bloodbraid Elves, especially to enable those fatal pushes. Finally, the last little bit against the Planeswalkers, the sustained pieces like Wrenn and Six and Liliana, you want to be holding up your Echoing Truths and Set Adrifts, okay? So Set Adrift is still going to be key, which is why I've said don't take out all of your Mesmeric Orbs, because that is where the positive interaction happens. You set adrift a Liliana on top of their library, and of course they mill it away because the Mesmeric Orb untaps. And also, Echoing Truth can be cast, as I previously mentioned, in response to a Liliana plus activation, where they +1 to make both players discard a card. You bounce the Liliana to their empty hand, and after the ability resolves, they've discarded the Liliana. So fun ways to get rid of that. Another card you might want to consider as well, especially if you have some type of counter-based decks or a lot of Planeswalkers in your meta, and you're only playing blue-black, well, it's gonna be Price of Betrayal. Price of Betrayal, I know it's only sorcery speed, but Liliana tends to stay at a very, kind of low loyalty most of the time. It's not like Oko. And so you're able to get rid of it, especially Wrenn and Six tends to stay at a low loyalty. So you're gonna be able to remove 5 counters, sometimes even less than that, and destroy the Planeswalkers, okay? That's all I want to talk about in terms of sideboarding in and out and some of the ins and out of Jund. So what are some of your strategies that you employ when you're playing against Jund? When you sit across from your opponent and they thought seize you, what are some things that you're thinking through? Please leave them down below in the comments. And of course, let me know if you disagree or don't, agree or disagree with some of the things that I've said. Let me know. I'd love to promote the discussion, as of course, this is still a matchup that I struggle with and many mill players struggle with. So just reading through your comments is going to help everyone in general. And of course, I want everyone to remember that even the impossible is possible. And as we ponder that thought, please join me next time as we take a glimpse into the unthinkable.